Hey guys, I wanted to take a second to discuss the planning that needs to take place before we start committing to code, before we put the fingers to the keyboard. Let me introduce you to something called pseudocode. And I've got all my notes up from last time I filmed this. This is take 2, so let me get that out of the way. So there's something called pseudocode. And it's just the earliest stage of coding. When you think of stages, there's like roughness. For instance, if you're building something, there's a rough stage and then there's a finished stage. So the rough stage is kind of the framework of the code, and it has the computer will never be able to read this. It's just for our understanding. So framework would be what we had kind of talked about last class, and that was prompt pad and placer. So the prompt is, and this is simply for the functionality of placing a building in the world. You would want somehow to prompt the user. This doesn't have to happen. You could simply place a building upon some action of the player. So what that action would be. So that would probably be a step further back from where we are. I think I've decided that we want to prompt the user with something called a form spec. And I'll get into that in a second. But so we want to prompt the user. Let me see if I can get my laser. So we want to prompt the user. We want to then possibly at that point place a pad. It has to be a ghost pad of some kind. And then we eventually want the user to click, yes, I want to place. The last thing that we didn't, and I wish there was a P to go along with this P pattern, but anyways. So the last thing that we do need to include is some sort of ager node where the user has to upkeep the building. Just as a side note and a side thought, there's some game design that needs to go in, some game design theory that needs to go into this mod. For instance, this ager node can also be like a loan, if you will. You get this building for cheap. You're only able to get one, but you get one for cheap, and then this ager is maybe more expensive. So some game design, how do you want to, where's that level of difficulty? And where do you put that level of difficulty to help spur the player on to doing and playing the game? So anyways, that's a side note. Okay, so we have these. This is what you would call pseudocode. All of this is called pseudocode. It's obviously something that the computer will never understand, but it's something that we understand. We've broken down our script. I'm not saying that this right here is exactly what we need to have. I'm just giving you an example of pseudocode, and this is how you do pseudocode. You sit around a table, you say, this is what I think should happen. Somebody says, no, that shouldn't happen because of this, this, and this. And you write those things down so that you don't forget. And then you start to figure out, okay, so fine, the pad can't go at that point. Well, where can the pad go? Do we need to move it into the placer? Do we need to obviously, as we discussed last time, we need some sort of ghost pad that shows the person this is where the pad will be. This is where the building will be. Do you like that? Do you not like that? If not, then let's rearrange. So there's this very important talking and communicating that needs to go on before we commit to typing things out into our program. So this is very, very far out. This is very, very removed from what we will actually be typing into our init.lua file and other files. We need to take steps to get closer to that init.lua. So how do we do that? Well, let's just take one of these tasks. Let's take the prompt task. And let's break that down and kind of think through, how are we going to prompt the person? How do we want to? What are the options? Let's consider each of the options. And so let's just say that somebody places a node. So they place a node and then it pops up a form spec, maybe. Or maybe so let's just say that's what you do. Bear in mind that there are also things called items that you can craft and whatnot. And items, you would look in a certain direction or something like that, and you would right click. So that's another, which I was brought to me, was this idea of having a blueprint that you hold in your hand, and it's a blueprint in general or possibly specific for a certain building, and you right click, and then that says, all right, you want to place it here, and it takes into account the position of the player and all that stuff. So that's a really slick way of doing this. I mean, it's very, very, I love that idea, and I'd love to do that. We'd have to then, again, for that type of a prompt, we'd want to do this exact same process, but I'm just going with fairly simple. Okay, so let's say that they place a node, then they right click on the node, and then then a form spec pops up. Now, form spec is basically user interface. It's something that shows up and you can select options. So then in here we would say, okay, if a form spec is going to pop up, do we just have like a yes, go, build? Or, what options do we provide that person, and why do we provide those options? What are the significance of those options? We don't want to crowd the user with a bunch of different options. We want to keep it simple, condense different options into common options. So then we go through and we say, okay, what do we want in the form spec? And then we have a check step where it kind of does a ghost. And so over here we say, okay, we need a ghost node. We need to develop a ghost node, and I wrote an arrow there. In order to do this, where we place this semi-transparent replica or image representation of what we want to place, we also not just do we need the ghost node, but we need to know, how do we even resemble the building that we're going to place? Like, how are we going to make it resemble that building? Is it, okay, maybe it's just a square, but I think that they would probably want to see, like, the front door is there. Does it look good? Or should we rotate? So and I mentioned rotate, we probably want that functionality. That's a little bit of an advanced functionality. So maybe that comes later on. Maybe we don't start with that. We keep it simple with simply, you place it and it says, do you like where it's located, or do you want to, scoot over a little bit? So now that, of course, one of the required features is going to be this ghost node. Not only the ghost node, the development of a node that is ghost-like, that can be walked through but can't be broken possibly, and things like that, but not only that, but also, how do we resemble the building that we're going to be placing with that ghost node? And now, I think that, and I hope you're thinking along the same lines, let's keep it general. Like, let's not have a detailed building where this ghost node is broken up into, like, smaller pieces and represents it accurately. I think we could just do a general sort of shape of the building, I think, and whatnot. Of course, then we also have the ghost pad that has to be placed. So where's this pad going to be placed, and show the user that and things like that. So that would be the ghost, and then eventually we say commit. That is where we would, and that says commit below me. That's where we would say, okay, I like it, do it, go, and then bam. There you have the whole process of the prompt, which, now that I'm thinking about it, that is effectively the entire script right there. That's the prompt pad in place, and so yeah. So just, we might throw out the other old stuff and just go with this or something. I don't know, but the other the other element of this discussion that I want to bring to your attention is over here in the code that I've written. I'd mentioned to you breaking up each of these ideas into pieces that can be used in different ways. One of those pieces would be the ghost node. It's going to be a node that is simply a node, but that can be used in different ways to create different effects. So, for instance, it could create a pad or it could create a mock-up house. Over here we have the pad placer node. So instead of it being simply a function, which is good and probably is the way it should be, but the way I have it over here is that there's a node that you place, and when you place it, on placement, it asks for a couple parameters, and it does this in the code side, not in a user interface. And it once you give it those specifications, it places a pad, like a dirt pad with a perimeter. So that's one example of how we can kind of break up our code and into chunks that we can be referenced by various different mechanisms in our mod. So that's kind of what I want you to do, is sit down with some of your buddies and think through your pseudocode. Really think through it. Talk about the different aspects. And I know some of you might think, well, I have nothing to contribute. Well, actually, that's wrong. You do have something to contribute. Don't be lazy like that and say, I have nothing, so I'm just going to sit by and ignore. No, listen so that you know, in fact, whether you have something or not to contribute. Actually listen to the discussion and then as a result, more than likely, you will find something that you can help with and contribute to. So, sorry guys, I know this was kind of a long video, but I wanted to clearly define how I want the development process of this mod to go. So I hope that kind of makes sense and gives you some ideas for developing it.